Now, Bill,
And
you have had the experience at sitting at the feet of Dr. Taguchi, Dr. Akoff, working hands-on with the thinking and philosophy of Dr. Deming, in a quick compare and contrast between the two and on drawing on the experiences of each, you know, how would you know, provide some enlightenment to the audience who are grappling with trying to manage their organizations and address their day-to-day challenges?
well, if I go back to Dr. Deming's work as a foundation,
Hmm.
and so amongst all the people you just mentioned, all the people I've had the great opportunity to work with, um, the the best foundation I see out there in terms of how to manage an organization is the Deming philosophy, and specifically the system of profound knowledge, psychology, systems, variation, and theory of knowledge. And so my approach is that okay, Deming gets enormous credit for putting together that foundation, but then in order to understand psychology, then I find you study the work of Peter, the writings and teachings of Peter Schultes, of Alfie Kohn, um, other psychologists whose work I think fits very well with where Dr. Deming is talking about. When it comes to systems, I find that one of the a great place to start, not limited to, but I find a great place to start is the work of Russell Lakoff, who Dr. Deming turned to learn more and more and more about systems. Because Dr. Deming's background was not very deep in systems. He was, in fact, when I asked Russ Akoff one of the first times I met him, I said, well, knowing that he and Dr. Deming knew each other going back to the early 50s, and I said, and I had there was an opportunity, I had a chance to meet with him one on one for 15, 20 minutes, and I said, I've got two questions for you, and he said, sure. I said, of all the things um, Dr. Deming learned from you, what do you think he would say stands out as what he learned from you? And I said, of all the things you learned from him, what stands out as you know the most significant things you learned from him? And relative to what he thought Deming learned from him, he said he found that Dr. Deming's understanding of systems was very um, the language he used was very implicit, and he thinks that Deming had an intuitive sense of systems, but he said he believes that Deming would say that he developed a better explicit understanding of systems. And so, back to your point, I find that personally, I find that the more I look at study Akoff's work, the better I develop an explicit understanding of systems as opposed to an intuitive sense of systems. And then if I want to understand about variation, then I do what Deming did is I go off and look at the work of Walter Schuhart or the writings of or Dr. Taguchi's work. And actually, with Taguchi's work, not only am I looking at variation and how to manage variation with Dr. Taguchi's work, but deeply connected to managing variation within Dr. Taguchi's framework is doing so as a system. So what's neat is that Taguchi is not a systems theorist the same way of Russ Akoff. It's almost as if, at least I would say, Taguchi's work in variation is very explicit in managing variation, but very subtly, and if you're not paying attention, you'll miss it. How he's talking about managing variation has a deep systems perspective, and so that's what's neat is. So I've enhanced my appreciation of variation in systems by looking at Deming. And Russ Akoff's work, there's not a lot of explicit exploration of variation, but there's a heavy emphasis on systems. And and I'd say within Akoff's work, an implicit appreciation of people. And then when it comes to the theory of knowledge, I find that, when it comes to, developing theories relative to improvement, I find that, the work of Cliff Norman and Ron Moen has helped enormously. And even in Taguchi's work, there's a decent amount of emphasis on developing a theory when you're designing the experiments. And then also with Edward de Bono's work, looking at very simple mental models for improving how we think together, which you could look at as part of the psychology piece.
Mm.
So what I found is that Deming did not have the system of profound. Dr. Deming had the system of profound knowledge as a framework, but to really explore that framework, you have to, beyond looking at what he wrote about, is to go deeply into those who studied systems or systems and variation in the case of Taguchi. So that's why, even though I came to Deming's work from Taguchi's work, I then realized that Deming's work is the deep foundation for an organization in terms of improving how they work, learn, and think together. But when it gets into the details of how to manage variation as a system, then I look at the variation of systems thinking from Taguchi. I look at how I can guide that with Russ Akoff's work.
Awesome. So, uh, taking that upon that, we have a theoretical foundation, we have a theoretical understanding, and we are moving in an organization, drawing from your previous experience. How do we work with teams to apply this type of synthetic continuum thinking? What do you see as the keys to bringing this philosophy and thinking to reality?
All right, so how you're looking for lessons learned in terms of
Yes,
how to work with
with the
teams
teams. Yeah,
with academic philosophy.
yeah. How to move this organization from I command and control oriented to the we organization that you have been describing all afternoon.
All right. Well, my answer has to do with exactly what you just made reference to, that I've not said too much about, is this notion of me and we organizations.
Hmm.
And so gosh, 20 some years ago, inspired by the 100% snap fit Toyota pickup truck story and a number of other things, I put together a very simple model, mental model of having people contrast an organization that produces products that are 100% snap fit and organizations that produce products where things are banged together with hammers. And instead of looking at at an automobile, I just the model I came up with is imagine that we have an organization that makes pens. And excuse me for a minute. All right. So again, inspired by the 100% snap fit Toyota pickup truck example and some other things, I when I was doing a seminar, I would always have these pens back in the day of writing on view graphs before LCD projectors. And the example I came up with is a mental model that has proved very powerful in sharing with teams to inspire them as to the contrast between a Deming organization and a non-Deming organization. If we just use a very simple model that there are Deming organizations and non-Deming, it's just like as there are red beads and white beads. I find very simple contrasts are powerful. And so the example I came up with was I had in front of me a blue pen with a cap and a body, and then a red pen with a cap and a body. And so I said to the class, I asked them to take a sheet of paper and draw a line down the middle vertically and a line across the middle horizontally. And I said, label the top of the left side blue pen company, label the top of the right side red pen company. And then I said, imagine each of you have recently spent 2 weeks visiting a blue pen company and 2 weeks visiting a red pen company. And the first week you visited the blue pen company, imagine there were no people there. And what goes on the top left of that 2x2 matrix is what would you see in a blue pen company physically as you walk around and visit that organization? Then in the top right, I ask them to write down if they visited a red pen company and were there for a week all by themselves. So imagine they visited both companies for 2 weeks, but the first week they spend in both companies, there's no one there but them. And so what goes in the top two cells are, what are the physical characteristics of a blue pen company and a red pen company? Then in the bottom two cells, I ask them to describe the people in both organizations under the premise that for the second week, they're visiting both companies. There are workers, or there are people there. There are people in the organizations. And I just asked them to, one, take a sheet of paper, divide it left and right, and top and bottom, and then label in the top red pen company, the top left blue pen company, the top right red pen company, and then again to remind them that you've recently visited both companies for 2 weeks each. The first week you spent in both, there's no people there. What would you see as you walked around the organization? What are the physical characteristics? In the bottom cells, there are people there. What are the people characteristics? And as they're ready to go, the additional information I give them is when you go to visit the blue pen company, realize that the product I buy from them, and I say every week I buy a blue pen from the blue pen company. They only make blue pens. The pen costs $1. When I go to use it, the cap goes off, the cap goes on, nice and easy. When I go to use the red pen, which costs $1, and every week I buy a red pen from the red pen company, they only make red pens. I explain to them, when I go to use the red pen, I can't get the cap off without using pliers. And in order to get them together, I use a hammer. And so the additional information I give them on that trip report is that the red pen company makes red pens, and the characteristic of the red pens is pliers to take them apart, a hammer to put them together. But the blue pen I describe is being snap fit. So when the customer takes the cap off, it comes off, it doesn't fall off, but it comes off nice and easy, and it goes on nice and easy. So with only that information, I then give them 5 minutes to imagine what they would see physically in both companies. There's no one there. They were there for a week. What are the people like in both organizations? With only that information. And having done that simulation, that mind experiment over 500 times, literally across the United States, around the world, the results in those 4 quadrants are identical. So after they write down individually what they would see, I would go around the room and ask them, what are the characteristics of a blue pen company physically? And people would say an open environment, good lighting, things are organized. When I shift over to the red pen company, I get clutter, chaos, doors, piles of scrap, piles of rework. When I go to the people in the red pen company, I'll get people looking over their shoulder, people that are fearful, people that are watching the clock, people that are very cloisters, keeping things to themselves. When I look at characteristics of people in a blue pen company, it's open, laughing, working together, sharing information. I'll ask them about hallway conversations in both. And so what's cool is the approach we started taking at Rocketdyne was to expose people to this model of red pen and blue pen companies, where the blue pen company, without saying anything about it in the beginning, they begin to realize that the blue pen company has the characteristics of what we would then call a Deming environment. So we do the trip report. I mean, frame it, have them take 5 minutes, fill out the cells, take another half hour to collect the information from them, ask about the hallway conversations, ask them more questions about both environments, leading to the question of what percent of organizations in their experience operate like a red pen company. And they'll say the majority, which is why Dr. Deming would call it the prevailing style of management. And then I ask them, what keeps those organizations in business? And they think about it, they think about it, they think about it. And this is a struggle for them. The explanation I give them, again, inspired by Dr. Deming, is lousy competition. Dr. Deming would say, be thankful for a good competitor. So to answer your question,
And the competitors all doing the same thing.
yep. So to answer your question, what we're doing at Rocketdyne, beginning in '98 timeframe, was explaining to people, having them participate in this trip report, where they fill out the trip report, they provide the feedback. And then what I found is, no matter where that was presented in these 500 plus times around the world, what goes in those 4 cells is identical. To a person, they all want to work in the blue pen company. So instead of saying, let's work in a Deming environment, I give them a framework where I have them think about what the people are like, what the managers are like, what the executives are like in both organizations. And the idea there is, instead of me telling them what these people are like in these organizations,
Mhm.
I'm asking them. And then what we get into is they would then be inspired to become those people. If they wanted to see, if they wanted to be in a blue pen environment, if they wanted to move the organization from the red pen side to the blue pen side, then they became aware then of what it would mean to them personally.
So they
And
define it
so,
for
so that's my
themselves.
approach. Yeah,
They
so my
define it for
approach.
themselves and they create it.
Yeah, so the approach we were taking, and I continue to use, is to have people become inspired
Mhm.
by what they think the organization is about. Because this is something I learned from a mentor years ago. Is he said, you can't tell anybody anything. He said you can lead them on a path to discovery. So instead of telling people you need to use the Deming philosophy and you should do this, the approach we started taking is to have them have them reveal what they consider to be the differences between operating in a blue pen and a red pen environment, and then have them see how their behaviors are sometimes consistent with blue pen, sometimes consistent with red pen, and then in all of this guided by an explanation of the system of profound knowledge.
Hmm.
And I find so that's what I find is, this exercise, this trip report, can be done in a half hour. And I find there's nothing like it to inspire people to begin to appreciate. Again, this is what Dr. Deming would talk about, the first step. And the New Economics talks about the first step. And so part of the first step I like to use with audiences is to have them imagine this world called a blue pen company and this world called a red pen company, and then use that as a first step towards imagining, more and more what a blue pen environment is like, and then deepen their appreciation of Akoff and Taguchi to add to that journey.
So, so good decisions require a method. Learning requires a method. Applying these strategies and putting it into good use requires a method. How do we embark on that and navigate on that journey of learning together, working together, thinking together as we seek to transform the organization, as the individuals transform, as within themselves, and as part of a whole in terms of the team and the collective. We recognize that we need to take that journey together also. How do
Well,
we start to apply?
let me attempt to answer, then you can steer me. Um,
Mm-hmm.
so when I'm if I'm routinely giving presentations to private audiences, public audiences, um, within organizations, or online presentations nowadays, for universities, both either classes I teach or guest lectures in. So I present the ideas, and then what often happens is one or two people from those audiences will be inspired to reach out to me and ask a question kind of like what you just raised, which is, how do I bring these ideas to my organization, which I find exciting. And then I like to get a sense of their seriousness and commitment, and I find they are serious. And if they are committed, then I will make it a priority to meet with them, perhaps once a week, perhaps every other week, perhaps once a month.
Mentoring and coaching.
And I mentor them, and part of the mentoring is give them videos to watch, presentations I've given, presentations by Deming or Akoff or Taguchi, things to read. But I also, at some point, um, also begin to focus on, and actually not even at some point, from the beginning, I want them to know that it's important that I appreciate that they're excited by the possibilities of a blue pen company to develop products that go together seamlessly, and the savings that come from that, and the excitement of developing those. I said but in order to implement this, you have to, one, become more aware of the Deming system of profound knowledge and the many aspects of it, become aware of the obstacles, such as presented by Dr. Deming in his 14 points and deadly diseases. I said, but as you're developing this appreciation, you simultaneously want to be developing the appreciation to explain it to others. Because your ability to put these ideas into practice requires your ability to understand the ideas, your ability to discover opportunities to implement the ideas, and then your ability to implement will most likely require others to help you. So you need to be able to see the opportunity, explain the opportunity to others, and then the question is, it can be kind of tricky. Is how does that application get funded? Do you need permission to go do that, or can you integrate that effort into your normal job? I mean, does your job have the latitude where you can develop a theory, test a theory, use the PDSA approach, and try some of the things with some help, or do you have to go to your manager and get permission and get funding? But I said they'll be excited by things, examples that I show them of either things we did at Rocketdyne or things that others did. But I said, to really implement these ideas where you work, you will have to develop your own applications, because people, they'll listen to how they were applied somewhere else. But for most people, for them to get really serious, they want to know, can we apply these ideas where we work? So I said,
Yeah.
so you want to be thinking about how can you apply them where you work. And that's another big aspect of the question you asked is there full-time does their full-time job, as mine did, does your full-time job give you the capacity to implement these ideas, or are you a full-time mechanical engineer, or a full-time buyer, or a full-time designer? So I had the luxury that my full-time job at Rocketdyne was originally providing facilitation and training for the application of Dr. Taguchi's ideas. And then that was, I was able to expand that to include Deming's work and Akoff's work and a whole lot of work of others. So my job included training people, helping them apply it, doing all of that. But
Mm.
if your job doesn't have that latitude because you're a software developer, then a software developer is not necessarily somebody who is hired to transform the organization. So I could couch leading a Deming transformation as part of my job. If it's not part of your job, that becomes far more challenging
Yeah, definitely.
because
Uh,
now you've got to do your full-time job and this. And even for me, I mean, it was my full-time job. It was very time-consuming, but at least it was my full-time job. So if I was meeting with you on a regular basis, then I was not meeting with you as a software engineer. I was meeting with you as a transformation um, facilitator. So these become the things I want people to become aware of, that I mean, an individual contributor, a master's degree student coming to one of my lectures can get inspired by this and they can apply it, but their ability to, to transform that organization, to initiate a transformation, depends upon things that are maybe outside of their control, which just makes it that much more challenging. Doesn't
sometimes
mean
the influence plays a role. I think that we do have to recognize too some important things in terms of no instant pudding. We can't copy, you can't just copy the success of another organization. We have to recognize the context of our own organization, our ability, and as Deming put it, your own system, and probably start your transformation within your individual self,
yes,
then the organization, smaller circles, and so on.
that's right. That's
Well,
right.
well,
That's right.
what
Exactly.
final message would you like to leave with the viewers and members of the quality community in terms of speaking to these approaches and, well, for today? Because as you know, we will be continuing in the series going into the beyond perfection and these other issues. But
Sure.
from today's lesson, in terms of putting the system back into system thinking, what would be your final message? What would you want to leave the audience today? And also to probably share some contact information in terms of reaching, if someone is interested in reaching out.
You've got a bunch of great questions. One thing that comes to mind is it's for people that don't know anything about Deming, but this is a new discovery. I mean, this is new material. They may wonder why they've never heard about Deming. In fact, a few years ago, a friend did a search on LinkedIn looking at the number of job postings on LinkedIn that reference Lean or Six Sigma or Agile or Operational Excellence or Deming or Duran. And the number of postings, the most popular, the greatest number of posts were relative to Lean or Six Sigma or Lean Six Sigma. And at the very bottom, in terms of number of job descriptions that referenced Dr. Deming's work and Joseph Duran. So what I find is, unfortunately, there's not a lot of demand for the Deming philosophy, at least judged by that, judged by that LinkedIn thing. And I
Again,
think,
HR professionals just don't know, and sometimes we also have to
yes,
recognize that they don't know.
yes.
A
And
lot of what they practice is actually considered bad practices, but they share it as good
what I
practices.
try to say is that just because you haven't heard of it, just because it shows up at the bottom of that list, don't let that dissuade you. I'd like people to appreciate. My encouragement is I I think this will dramatically enhance your. I think if you're a transformation, if you're if now it gets into, if you're in the role of a, if your full-time job involves continual improvement activities, then this is an opportunity to really accelerate those efforts and discover some, why your efforts may be limited to firefighting.
Mm,
Um, and so it could give you a whole new operating space to operate. Um, but I'd say if I think I think there are some very simple case studies out there, things they can find at Deming Institute web page that can some things that I've written that can um, provoke them. And I guess one other thing I would throw out, Chris, is asking how much attention do they give to integration, meaning how
mhm,
things come together. So whether they're a designer or a manufacturing person or working in a hospital, what I'd like them to contemplate is how much effort goes into improving integration. On the other hand, the other thing that really comes to mind very simply is I'll provide you with a copy of the article on called Vision Therapy, and it's an article I wrote for the Land Management Journal, which explains the the how I go about giving the red pen, blue pen company trip report. So I would say, going back to a question a little bit ago, is that what I would encourage them to do is read the article on vision therapy and ask themselves, um, find out, are they inspired by that article to think more about their organization, and is it not that it's very simply a red pen or a blue pen company, which is a very simple model. What I would ask them to contemplate is, in which direction is their organization moving? Is it moving in a direction of looking at things more and more holistically in the sense of a Deming organization? Are they moving in that direction? Or are they moving in the direction of becoming more and more focused on blaming workers for red beads and focusing on scrap and rework and focusing on firefighting? And so I would say is that I would encourage them to look more at this thing called red pen and blue pen companies in the vision therapy article and ask themselves to honestly think, are their efforts, where do they find them in that model? And I would encourage them to discover more about Dr. Deming's work, who I think provides the greatest um, explanation as to how to move the organization from a red pen leaning direction to a blue pen leaning direction. Does that?
we'll actually hope that they go to Dr. Deming's work and not the like Deming's work. Because there's a lot of confusion and like Deming work out there where parts of the Deming thinking and philosophy. So you hear about people taking the PDCA, and making that a part of Deming's work and looking at it in isolation of, the wider system also. So quite
Well,
often that has also led to some confusion too.
well, to your point, I think there are for those who are long admirers of Deming's work. I would encourage them, just ask is what is your familiarity with how Dr. Deming's work is useful in improving how we work, learn, and think together
Hmm.
with, and can they appreciate the value proposition of of a framework that could systematically develop things that integrate, that are as the Toyota pickup truck was 100% snap fit, and do they have that level of appreciation of the Deming philosophy? Because there's various levels of appreciation of the Deming philosophy. There's the 14 points, the deadly diseases, but I think the brilliance of his work, if you look in the later years in a system of profound knowledge, I think what I would wonder is, are they continuing to deepen their appreciation of what that offers, and in
Yes.
particular, including um, their appreciation of the power of continual improvement in managing white bead variation to improve integration. So
Awesome.
if they're in the Deming community, there are those opportunities. And if they're outside the Deming community with Lean or Six Sigma or operational excellence, then those are easily things that they may not be contemplating, that a a study of the Deming philosophy could allow them to contemplate. Yeah, I
Uh,
think I think there is so much there that I think is underappreciated. I think the Deming philosophy is far more powerful than people can imagine. Here some 30 years after his passing. I think it is. I think he knew how big it was, and I appreciate the opportunity, to be interviewed by you um, to inspire people to go back and realize that it is big, and it is. And when you get into the territories that we did at Rocketdyne and exploring white bead variation as a system, there's again there are opportunities there for implementation that can lead to some very serious improvements in products and services and how organizations operate. So I just leave it at that. Thank you, Chris.
thank you, Bill. I really just wanted to extend thanks on behalf of the CQI Deming community, and we're looking forward to speaking again soon.
All right, we'll continue. Take care, everybody.